Now we've got the high pressure fuel leak under control. Now we're going to go after this crank no start, the original problem that brought this vehicle into our hands. When I have one of these problems, I like to start off with either fuel pressure or spark. In this case, I do both. Just the EFI vehicles in general, you got to get to what's going on, and you want to do it in a hurry, and you don't want to be buying sensors and start doing a bunch of repair work that's just not needed. You know, you'll end up making the situation much worse. I'm going to show you the steps that we use to get it narrowed down to figure out if we're having a spark or a fuel delivery issue. Now out in the field, we did a quick little test with a screwdriver and realized we had spark, but once we opened up the fuel cap here on the pressure regulator and pushed it, we also had fuel, but it still didn't start. And so this one's an odd one. You know, usually when you have spark but you have no fuel, normally it's like a fuel pump. In this case, there is some redundancy. It's not much, but this thing should run, but yet it does not. So let's figure that out. So first we're going to do the key-on pressure test. We know we've got pressure, but we want to make sure the system's holding. And then we'll do the spark test next. As the old saying goes, has fuel, has fire, should run. It's not always the case. Okay, so we've got fuel pressure. I'm going to have them crank the engine over, and then we're going to test for spark. One thing with these cars, there's a thing that's called 3 and 18x signals, and if you don't have both, you won't have spark. Alright, crank it. Do it again. Alright, so we have spark. We have fuel. But why do we not have any fuel pressure? We're going to open up the book on this one so we can show you the schematic, because I'm pretty sure at this point we've got a problem with the brain here. With GMs, they also have an ignition module, but it's not like the ignition modules of the 70s. These things are much bigger, much smarter, and they control more of the show. And that may be where we're going. I know another common issue I have found with these GMs and times is that this harness can have issues. But we've already kind of did some testing. And pretty much you just do a wiggle test and see if it'll start. But at this point, we definitely know our fuel injectors are not arming. And so why is that? Well, let's get to it. As we look at the engine schematic, one thing that we did find is that the purple wire here arms the injection system. And even if you have both the crank and the cam sensor, if it goes in, but it doesn't actually close the buffer amplifier, this can cause the fuel injectors not to arm. Now we're going to do a quick ground test to make sure we have ground. On GMs, they keep the 12 volt hot all the time at the injector and they close the ground. So we're going to do a quick 12 volt test to see if we actually have power at the injector, but I think in the end we're going to find that the ignition module here has an issue with closing the buffer amplifier. And there's really no good test for this. I mean, we're going to find here that purple white probably has no feed, and that's probably why our computer cannot arm our injectors. So as you can see here, we have the fuel injector itself pinned off. He's going to turn the key and we're going to see if we've got 12 volt. Go ahead and turn the key. Our battery is low and we know that, but anything above 10 volts this thing should start. Go ahead and try to crank it. Okay, that voltage should have switched and it didn't, so it proves right there we're not getting any ground switching. Where does the ground switching come from, you ask? The buffer amplifier. Alright, well I think at this point we've pretty much, we got to be down to the ignition module. It controls both spark and fuel injection. We're going to go ahead and replace that. We're going to go to the junkyard instead. These parts are kind of expensive and unfortunately they can't test them at Riley's, so go get a couple at the junkyard. They're not expensive. They're pretty cheap actually. So we're going to go get a couple. We're going to replace this and see if this thing will actually fire off. One quick side note, there is a ground wire underneath of here. We've already tested it and we do have our ground, so we definitely know it's not that. We've definitely got it narrowed down to something in this ignition coil system is not feeding back information to the ECU to arm the injectors. Without having to get to a bunch of sophisticated testing, you know you have your spark and your crank sensors working if your spark shows up here, which it did. We know we have our 12 volts and ground because that showed up, but we had no switching whatsoever. So the switching comes from here because the cam signal also comes in this brain as well. We'll show you that when we get it apart. Alright, we're back from the junkyard. We went ahead and pulled a complete unit. And as you can see right here, these are all the pins that intercept the cam and crank sensors and then your coil pack. But this also controls your fuel injection information. And to show you what the ignition module itself looks like, it's this. When we get the old one off, we'll go ahead and tear it apart on the bench. But for now, just so for sake of the video and get this car running again, we're just going to replace the entire pack. Now this will cost a little bit more at the junkyard, but at least this way you don't have to worry about trying to figure out which coil goes where. It's marked and just simple plug and play, and we'll show you that right now. Okay, so what we're about to show you, this is for VinK 3800s. There is a third series. They do things a little bit different with the bracket and stuff. So this is for 1995 through about 1999. Alright, what are you going to do first?
The bracket.
So you're going to pull the bracket off the alternator. Now there's two bolts underneath the ignition module you're going to have to get at. Now if you get everything apart and you find that this ground wire doesn't look like this, fix that first, retest before you replace the brain. So next we're going to remove the rest of the bolts so we can get this out as a complete assembly. You can take the top off and get to the ignition module, but we found it's just easier to go to junkyard, find one from a crash car you know is running, and chances are you're not going to have any other problems. This was the first year for the Series 2, so we're finding that with this 95, you know, a lot of the quirks they ended up working out later on that made this engine reliable, we're running into. And that's not a bad thing. You just fix them, go about your way, and you'll still get 200, 300,000 miles out of this engine. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to remove that bolt, and we're going to pull the ignition module connection off, and then we'll get the whole complete assembly out. Now you do want to mark your spark plug wires if you're going to go this route. We've already done that, so that way it's just easy installation. You don't have to worry about trying to figure out which coil went where. Although there's a lot of pictures online, and it's easy to do if you do end up just taking it off and then trying to figure out where you're at. But for the sake of this video, I'll show you. 3-6, 2-5, 4-1. Do not do anything different in that order, or you will change your firing order, and that would be a bad day. Alright, let's remove the ignition connection. Okay, you're going to need a 7mm bolt to get that off. They shouldn't be on too terribly tight. Hopefully someone didn't just over tighten it, and we didn't, because we're the last ones to pull this off. And we're always careful when we go back in with it. A lot of this repair is microsurgery, unfortunately. And you can also check while you have this out to make sure all your pins are intact. Now this one's intact. We don't believe this is the problem. We have the spark, so we know we're getting our signals. Next we're going to remove the spark plug wires, and then we're going to pull the module whole. Alright, real simple. Remove your bolts. There's two bolts underneath, not bad. So there's two 15mm bolts you need to get at. Deep socket. As you can see, the ignition module moved real easy there. I'll mess with the old one later. Alright, here's our junkyard replacement. You could go out and spend a bunch of money for this repair, but there's really no reason to. Find a good one at the junkyard that's crashed. Low miles. Alright, just simply bolts back into the head. Yeah, this engine is well thought out, but the problems that you run into are definitely odd. Right back in with your 15. Don't forget your ground. There's a separate bolt for that. And I'll give you a look after it's all together, because there's no way I'm getting the camera in there with the wrench at the same time. Bracket first, ground wire second. As you can see, he's wrapping it around, make sure it doesn't get into the belt. I'll go ahead and show him. This wire is crucially important. You've got to do this step right. We're going to put the bolt on it, and we're just about done. It's about 35 foot-pounds for the top bolt, and the same for the bottom. You don't want to crush that ground to pieces. As you can see, he's holding the ground wire to make sure it doesn't spin in place. You do not want that ground wire chafing. That will also give you this issue, but you'll have a no spark condition at that point without the ground. Okay, plug the ignition module back in. And do not over tighten it. This is one connection that you can really over tighten and really cause an issue for yourself that you don't have right now. Just a quarter turn past stop, call it good. Alright, the easy part, just hook everything up as you marked your wires. And the last one. Okay, ready to retest. There you go. Monty is running again. It was important for us to get it running before we did the timing chain. You never want to do a timing chain unless the engine's running. Even if it's running crappy with a late chain, you still want it running. But that's what we're going to end up doing next, on the next episode. We're going to give this thing some time to run, make sure it's not going to stall or do anything, but yeah, we're fairly confident the brain is bad. And I'm sure the previous owner wouldn't have sold this car if she would have known it was just a $20 part that caused it. This is it. This is what caused the no fuel injection. Seems silly to me, but we got a good deal, and someone else will get a good deal with a car that's going to run for a long time. Nothing like the sound of a 3800 running as it should. Alright folks, stay tuned. Timing chain coming soon.